So how often do we complain about feeling unwell, about our aches and pains and how unfit we are, and just accept that this is our lot in life? Much of the time we have tiny niggles and we just keep moving because, honestly, is it really worth complaining about? But there are times, if we disregard these warning signs, that we're on a path to something more ominous that really needs attention. Now, the MBTI types of people handle pain often quite differently. Let's look at the preferences introvert and extrovert. Introverts get their energy from their inner world. If they have a pain or something is wrong with them, they take time to reflect and think internally about what's happening to them before they decide to act. They're often our silent sufferers. I have a son who's an introvert, and if he's sick, he just gets quieter. He doesn't tell me about his pain unless I ask him, and he's more likely to become sicker because he hasn't externalized his symptoms to anyone. If I do know he's getting sick, I'm constantly asking him how he is so I can hear what's in his head and evaluate how ill he's going to be. And then there's the extrovert. Now, the extrovert might not even be in a lot of pain, but they're certainly going to let the world hear about it. They need to outwardly express all of their emotions, and that includes pain. Extroverts' verbal expression of their problem is important because talking helps them think, and they like to hear what other people have to say. Believe me, I know. I am one. Let me tell you, if they're in real pain, you'll certainly be aware of it. And then there are the just do it types, the judging types, who take immediate action, seek out help with all the symptoms and the pain. And then there are the flexible perceiving types that might put off seeking help because, you know what, other things just get in the way. They can't be bothered, or it's all just too hard. Can you relate to any of those scenarios? Have a think about it. What do you do with your health niggles? Today we're going to be talking to Caitlin Samson. Caitlin is a clinical nutritionist and exercise physiologist in Atlanta, Georgia. Caitlin's faced several health issues herself, but found her path to healing through nutrition. She takes a holistic, individualized approach with her patients, and her focus is on consuming real, true food and treating you as a whole person. It's her mission to share this approach with others. Welcome, Caitlin. You're also an author of 2 best-selling cookbooks and have a master's degree in clinical nutrition and another in exercise science, and run marathons, are a wife, and have 3 children. Oh, my goodness. How do you do it? Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I don't know. Well, the marathons, I wish I was still doing those, but those have kind of taken a back burner with my kids.
I can imagine. I'm not sure where you'd fit the time in for that. So that is absolutely amazing. Now, to start the show, can you just give us a bit of background of why you're here doing the work that you do and how it started for you in your early years?
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it brief because it's kind of a long journey that I've been on. So just going back to when I was about 5 years old, I remember being in pain, having joint pain. Now I'm from up north, Buffalo, New York, in the US. And so it's very cold there. If anybody knows that area, right. Lots of snow. And so in the winter, we just thought it was worse at that time because it was so cold. So we kind of just brushed it off, honestly, like thinking it was just a fluke thing that I had this pain. So years later, I found out that I did have an autoimmune condition, rheumatoid arthritis. So fast forward a little bit to my teenage years, I ended up having my gallbladder removed. For months, I had pain, and we thought it was indigestion. You know, what 16-year-old has gallbladder issues, right? Yes. I mean, my parents would never have thought. And so what happened is I ended up with pancreatitis. There was a stone passing through into my pancreas, and I ended up going to the emergency room because I was in so much pain. I was just vomiting, and it was really terrible, so much pain. So they ended up finding out that I had pancreatitis and that my gallbladder was like full of sludge, they said. So they ended up removing my gallbladder. At that time, I just had no idea about foods and what I was eating. So we just thought it was kind of this mystery thing of why we thought I was healthy. You know, I looked healthy, I guess, because I wasn't overweight. You know, people think if you're not overweight that you're healthy. That's not the case.
No.
And I was an athlete and all of that. So we just thought why did this happen? Well, now looking back, I can see the way I ate and just some other things that probably were going on, why that probably happened. So I got my gallbladder out, felt a lot better. But then issues in my 20s were happening, digestive issues, irritable bowel syndrome. I ended up not having a period for a year. And that was kind of the final thing where my mom was like, you need to go back to the doctor and figure out what's going on. So their solution was to put me on oral contraceptives. I tried them. I felt awful on them. I just couldn't even stand a few days on them. I said, I'm done with this. I'll just hope everything normalizes. And my sister ended up seeing a more holistic practitioner and said, he's helping me a lot. Why don't you come and see him? And so I said, at this point, when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, that's where I was at. I was really tired all the time as well. So he changed my life. I said, I'll give this a try. I really thought he was not going to change anything in my diet. I thought I had a good diet. Boy, was I wrong. I was a huge sugar addict. I realized that. I was eating foods that were not good for my body. And sometimes the recommendations out there, we're told to eat certain things that might not be great for certain people. And it wasn't for me. So about 8 weeks after starting his program, I got a menstrual cycle back. And that was a huge physical sign that things were improving. But beyond that, my joint pain improved. I had less anxiety. I felt less stressed. My energy just was getting better and better. And I just felt like I had my life back. And then that's when the kind of light bulb moment went off. Now, at that point, I had a master's degree in exercise science. I was really big into running and all of that. But that really encouraged me to go back to get my master's in applied clinical nutrition, because I just wanted to share this with the world. I'm like, we don't have to feel bad. I have to tell other people, I have to have that education behind me. And so that's what I've been doing. And it's just awesome because I feel like having the personal story really helps me have the passion to help people and let them know you can do this. Because I don't take any medication. I'm able to have young children and keep up with them and feel good. I wouldn't have if I didn't change things. I don't know if I would really be able to tolerate having 3 children if I felt bad,
And I mean, autoimmune diseases don't disappear. They're still there, like you say. So, you could always aggravate that, and that your autoimmune diseases can come back. But if you've got them under control and in remission, so to speak, then yes, it would have been so hard if you'd had rheumatoid arthritis flare-ups and you were doing all of that type of thing at the same time.
Exactly.
I love the fact that you went back and became a clinical nutritionist, because that puts a bit of science behind your stories. Because, as I was just saying to you earlier, there's so much evidence out there that's anecdotal around all of this.
Right.
But nobody's done true studies on a lot of things, clinical studies,
Right.
to prove that. And so, therefore, having something like that behind you does make you kind of more believable for some people, including your story. And I think that's a really great thing to have there. So have you found that has helped you as well, having that backup of a degree, in that sense?
Oh, absolutely. There's definitely those folks out there that really want to make sure you have that education. And that's why I went that route. There's certifications you can get out there. And I really think a lot of those folks I learned from them, so it's not to say, if you have a master's degree, you know it all, but it really does help it, because there's so much I learned throughout those 2 years. That's 2 years of in-depth research. And so it really helped, and I loved it too. So I think it's really important. And I think that's really important for my patients to see that, of course.
Yeah, of course. And so with your clients, you have a whole range of clients aging from older people to children as well, do you?
I do. I do have some children, quite a few with digestive issues. So we work on the diet and some supplementation. And what's great with working with children is I feel like they're very resilient. I always say they have less damage to them than decades of us adults.
Yes.
So I see that, it's nice because it feel like we can get somewhere sooner, if that makes sense.
I agree. Less damage over a longer period of time really does take a lot longer to heal in that sense. And you find that they're less stuck to certain things. Like adults find it really hard to give up certain things. And I guess if you're in control of your child's diet and you take it away, then they're not buying that stuff. It's not as if they have to change a whole lot of behaviours around what they're doing in that sense.
Yes. Yeah, and it's remarkable sometimes in a few days, even the moms will write me sometimes like how profound just those few days of changing their diet have been.
Yes.
So it's really cool to hear those stories.
Because I know I put my kids on a fail-safe diet, it's called, in South Australia by the Sydney Hospital, Prince Alfred Hospital have it, because they were having all kinds of things go wrong with them. And they have been colour-free, mostly colour-free, and additive-free for the last 10 or so years. And, oh, my goodness, the difference that it made to their health was massive. And my husband is similar. Wow. He has a whole lot of stuff too. Now, this is my little theory, is that I'm 60. When we grew up, we had bread with no preservatives. Everything went mouldy if you left it for 2 days. Mm-hmm. We had 3 kinds of chips, salt, vinegar, chicken and plain. We didn't have honey baked ham with, meat sauce on it, chips, this type of thing. So all of those food colorings and preservatives and add-ins were so much less. So our gut health as older people appears to be so much better than the younger generation coming through because let's face it, if you start looking at labels and things that are in food, and I'm like you eat what's simple and natural, it's huge. It's huge. So do you think that has got any impact in that?
Oh, absolutely. And this is probably a conversation for a whole nother day, but there's some testing that I do called autonomic response testing that was developed by a German physician, Dr. Klinghardt. And this just allows me to get feedback on what's good for that person's body or not. But I do notice in my folks who are, older, that didn't grow up with all this processed stuff, I honestly can even just tell in their body that they have a healthier foundation. That's what I end up saying to them. I'm like, you have this healthy foundation. And in the younger people, I just don't feel that as much. I really sense that a lot. And I always tell folks too, it's not so much the food itself that's the bad guy, if we want to, say bad. It's more what we're doing to the food.
It is. That
affects it and then affects how we're processing it in our bodies.
I was running a workshop last week when a very frustrated member of the team asked why no one on their team cared about structure and timeframes. Does this happen at your workplace? Frustrations lead to unhappiness and disillusionment. Don't lose valuable team members. Contact me now at thepersonalitycoach.com.au to help you build team communication and cohesiveness. And if you look at what we do today, because we're all moving in such a fast society, then everything's packed in little packets and put in lunch boxes and not home baked, not, like you say, I don't think real sugar contains a problem. Too much of it definitely does, but it's what's in those sugars that does that to the, and the amount of behavioural issues.
Yes.
I kind of sit there and go, wow, I was a school teacher 30 years ago and didn't have behavioural issues. My son's a school teacher now, and there are 5 or 6 kids in every class that are disruptive behaviours and all the rest of it. And I have seen with my own children and my own husband that food colouring affects them so much so that my husband eats coloured snakes. And I know he won't, we get these things called pythons over here in Australia, and they've got all colours in them. And he gets in a bad mood and he'll say to me, I feel really angry after eating that. Now, we're talking about a 64-year-old, okay? So I always say to people, if that's what happens and someone's food sensitive to someone who's older, what actually happens to those younger kids? That are ingesting all of those M&Ms and all of those colours and all of that type of stuff, It
Yeah.
must be overwhelming.
Yeah, and they can't communicate it in that
No.
way, and that's the thing. They're communicating it with the outbursts. Yeah. And I will say with my kids, like I guess I expected to have more of that because you hear about that, like that's considered the norm, but honestly, I mean, they're kids, they have their moments.
Yes.
But I just feel like we have so much fun and there's so many good calm moments, and I really think it's the way they eat. And I always think I could do better, of course, but it's real food at least,
That's right.
without all of that stuff. And I really think it makes a huge difference. And I know for myself, that's why I feed them kind of what I eat, because I know if I ate that, I would feel bad. Like you were saying, your husband knows he feels bad. So why would we feed that to a child and expect them to be fine?
Yes. Yeah.
They're going to feel bad too.
So when you talk to your parents about going on a diet of good foods, how do you, it's really hard because we've all got habits and behaviors around food. And so do you go into it at a psychological level to change those habits, or how do you address those issues when you want them to change their diet?
Yeah, well, I think number one, I really always encourage the parents like to try to get everybody on board, the whole family on board. And then also I try to just really start with just giving them replacements. So I have them food track for me, and then it's like, okay, if you have these crackers normally, let's do these other kind of crackers that are more whole food based, just to make it easy on them, versus all of a sudden they've got to cook everything from scratch. I mean, you have to be realistic.
Yes.
Yes. And and I always praise them on, hey, okay, you got a couple fruits in there, right? Like, let's try to sneak in a vegetable to a smoothie, like little things like that,
Yeah. So you really chunk it down and make it small, because you're right. Mm-hmm. Taking away something that is your favorite food, yet you're replacing it with something that's a better one of that food is, psychologically that does feel better.
Yes, I think that it helps people, just for it to not feel so difficult, because change, is definitely, and plus, you have children may have sensory issues, or just real resistant to the change. I find it works a lot of times to just find those replacements, and that way the mom isn't so stressed, or I should say mom and dad, of course. Usually the mom's the ones bringing them, of course. Yes. That's how it goes. But also, then the child doesn't feel like what's going on,
Yeah. Yeah. So can you tell us some stories, without names or anything like that, some stories of changes that you've either made with adults or with children, what kind of recovery they've had?
Yeah. So I've just been thinking of this one mom that probably within, I'd say 2 weeks, she sent me an email and just said how much the dietary changes helped her son. Now they were trying to work on more of his speech. I believe he was 3 years old, and they just felt like he was also working with a speech therapist. But she actually, I had saved some quotes from her with her saying, he's now saying, whatever word it was, this word or that word now. And she just also said that he seems happy.
Right.
Like she just could tell like he was happier, that he felt better. And then sometimes also with children, I'll just see like if they were constipated, that their bowel movements start to improve. And then also sometimes if they're more on the side of the loose stool, that we start to see some normalcy happen there. So a lot of times digestive improvements happen, which always is an easy thing to kind of gauge progress with, which I like. Yeah.
So as a parent, not as a parent, as an adult, do you have any, like your story about rheumatoid arthritis is quite amazing. And I know I actually have arthritis in my hands. And if I eat anything that's soy vinegar, maybe oats as well, my hands actually freeze up. I can't move them. So I don't touch any of those things, and my hands are quite mobile. Because I've worked out what are my foods that will trigger that. So with bigger conditions, what kind of progress, have you got any cases that you could tell us about, like your own, that they progressed into remission from an autoimmune disease?
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to some of the testing I do too, with the autonomic response testing, because I can actually check food stressors that way. But with pretty much all of my autoimmune folks, they'll go from being very stressed with lots of foods, eggs, oats, even organic rice, sometimes bothers them, and other grains like quinoa. They just can be stressed with so many foods. And then, give us several months. It takes time, of course. But once we work through things, help the body detox better, and also, do work on the diet, then they're able to introduce those foods without a problem. They're able to tolerate white potatoes, or, maybe couldn't before. So it's definitely a process. I do use some supplementation too, to just support their body to help move toxins out. Because again, a conversation probably for a whole other day, but we do live in a toxic bubble, so there's a lot of other things I work with folks on too, to just help get some toxicity down in the body. So yeah, I've seen folks tolerate food so much better, not have the joint pain anymore. Some folks I've had with other flare-ups, like with interstitial cystitis, sometimes that will calm down as well. I've had lots of success too with folks with digestive issues. Again, whether it's constipation or irritable bowel syndrome, and things just start to normalize.
Yeah, because it is the truth. It is what you put in your mouth. And nowadays the connection between the brain and the gut is just massive. All the scientific stuff that's backing that.
Yes.
And, we have a generation of young kids who are depressed and anxious and very, very stressed. And there's all that social media, everything that goes with that. But for me, I also look at it and go, and there's all that food, don't mean to put McDonald's down, but their bread rolls last forever. There's all of those products that are out there that our teenagers are eating, because teenagers tend to not love really great food. And they go with their friends and they're eating, and often what's cheap and what's not so good. That's another area that I see as being something that, if people are listening and thinking about those things, is a really great thing. Good food does relieve a certain amount of anxiety and stress within you.
Oh, yes.
Eating well, because your mind is...
I think you hit on something very important there, to make that gut-brain connection, because if you are improving your diet and doing whatever you can to improve your gut health, then mentally the anxiety, depression, or other mental health disorders, really can improve. And I think that's why like I mentioned to you, I didn't go to see that practitioner originally saying I need work on my anxiety and my stress. No, it was about other things. And then with those improved, the body heals as a whole. So those other issues, you can't really separate physical and mental health, it's all connected. So I totally agree. Sometimes I just want to help all those kids just feel better. I'm like, oh, you don't have to suffer that way. Let's clean up the diet and try that, and get you some maybe good supplementation to help support your body too, so.
But it is really, like you say, a hard thing then. And I was really lucky because I got onto my kids before they got to that age and stage, and they were pretty good during the teen, and mental health wise pretty good too. And they were pretty good during those 10 years. They didn't really go out, because my son had a whole lot of sensitivities anyway, and so he found that once he'd found out what they were, he didn't really want to touch those foods either. So that was a saving grace. So if there's someone listening at home and they're thinking, oh my goodness, where do I start? What could I do? Apart from where would they find what would you do about finding an awareness about the foods that they're eating? Do you talk to people about looking at packets in supermarkets, that type of thing? What are you actually putting in? What kind of hints could you give us?
Yeah.
To get started?
Well, what comes to mind when you say that is a girl that I was meeting with who we were working on digestive health with her. And when we looked at her food diary, she was eating a certain type of cereal. And I said, let's just look it up. I don't know what's in it, but I'd like to know, and let's see what we can find out. And there was about 12 grams of sugar in a serving. And that's if someone eats just a serving, right? It's easy to have 2 or 3 sometimes. And she was like, is that a lot? I don't know. Well, at least here in the U.S., the American Heart Association has kind of capped it at about 25 grams of added sugar a day for women. For men, it's a little higher, about 35 grams per day of added sugar. So just her reading labels more, like that just brought an awareness to her, because that next time I saw her, she's like, I'm looking at stuff. We no longer buy those cookies we used to have because I saw how much sugar was in them. So I just thought, well, that's great. Because then even though her husband's not coming in with, seeing me, he's benefiting from what we're doing too. So it's kind of a trickle effect there. So I think reading labels is huge. I think look at the ingredients. I really tell folks the main areas I look at, I go right to the ingredients to see what's in the food. Maybe it is low carb or high protein, but what's really it made of? Is that what you want to put in your body?
And especially the low sugar. When you go into low sugar's often got a whole lot of chemicals attached to it as well.
Yes. So you have to really be that detective. And I like to keep things simple because, I'm a mom of 3, so simple's good. I really encourage folks stay on the perimeter of the grocery store, and you don't have to be reading a lot of labels because it's more in those inner aisles that you're going to have stuff that's processed. So I think watching the sugar intake is important along with reading those labels.
Yeah.
And then I really find so many of my folks, I very rarely have someone that comes in eating a good amount of fruits and vegetables. So I think these are good takeaways for the listeners to just, look at what you're, eating, maybe food track for a week and see how many fruits and vegetables you're having. Because most of my folks really can increase there too. So, I say strive for 5 a day, 5 servings a day combined of fruits and vegetables. That's usually easy enough for people to remember. But if you do more than that, great. The recommendation's actually higher than that, but most people aren't at that.
No.
So in keeping it to real food, because I think it does get very confusing out there and people feel very overwhelmed. But I feel like you can't go wrong with food that's been around for how many years, right? If it comes from the earth, usually it's going to be pretty safe to eat and you don't have to feel confused,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people that are grain intolerant probably pick that up fairly fast about their different grains once they start looking at their foods. I can imagine, like, yes. I know that porridge, oats, just do my hands in, don't touch anything like that. In fact, don't eat a lot of grains really in that sense. But really it's almost like if it's a single ingredient, an egg, an avocado, an apple, like if they're, easiest thing is that. But I guess a lot of people get caught up on the cooking, like the vegetables, stuff like that. What kind of advice do you give to them around that? Because if you've got 3 kids like you have and you're coming home from work and you're going to be preparing a meal, how do you get those things in a simple way? Do you recommend cook-ups? What do you recommend?
I love frozen vegetables. Honestly, I really encourage folks just keep them in the freezer because people don't like things going bad. I find so many times folks will say, I don't want to buy, these fresh fruits and vegetables because they'll go bad if I don't eat them. Keep some frozen ones on hand. It can even just be as an emergency if you can't get to the store to get the fresh ones you want.
Yep.
But those cook up so fast, they're affordable too, which is great for many people, so I always do that, have the frozen ones on hand. And they're frozen at their prime, so you still get a good amount of nutrition.
Yeah, no,
in them
I
as
agree.
well.
I tend to have a lot of frozen vegetables, particularly beans.
Yeah.
Love them. So if I've got a child that's really not that into that and all of a sudden I'm all enthused, I listen to you and I go, oh, right, that's it. I'm going to, no sugar, not going to do, how do you recommend cutting sugars and that back in everybody's lives and when everyone's addicted to sugar in the family. So let's go. In that sense.
Well, my first step really is to replace it. Like if a child is used to a certain amount of cookies or a certain kind of cookies, maybe it's Chips Ahoy. I don't know if that's, you're familiar with that brand, right?
Yes, we do, yes.
Okay, I figured that one we'd all know.
That's worldwide.
Yes. I really encourage more of, there's a brand called Simple Mills that we have here that's grain-free and has no white sugar. They sweeten more with like a coconut sugar. Sometimes they might use honey. Very simple ingredients, and they taste great. So at least it gets in a healthier, more nutritious sugar, if that's where we have to start. And then if we can cut that down, that's the goal, right? We don't want to be eating even this like healthier processed stuff all the time, but it's great to have that option because let's face it, I mean, who's not going to have a cookie ever again,
That's right.
I mean,
yes.
But at least there's, that's like my go-to is having that. And I will tell you, like my body, I'm very in tune. If I were to have white sugar, I feel very tired and I can feel it in my body. I don't feel good. But when I eat like those healthier brands that have, they use the coconut sugar, it's just so different. I can tell. Or maybe you can make stuff yourself. I do a lot of what are called paleo recipes, and that's PALEO. And basically that if you are grain free, that would be a great option to look for paleo recipes because they don't use any grains and they won't use any white sugar. So if you want paleo chocolate chip cookie recipes or paleo pancakes, you can find some of those things if you want to make it yourself to save some money versus buying some of those other things.
No, that's really good to hear. And that's great to hear. Thank you for those tips, because starting something like that is often we start it because we've already got the symptoms. So
right.
Unfortunately, prevention is better than cure. But if you're sitting out there now and you're thinking, I'm going to get a start on this, they're fabulous hints. Now, I can talk to you forever because I love this subject, but I have to go. We have to go. So look, thank you for joining me today. I'm just wondering, how would people contact you and where can they find your cookbooks? You've got 2 cookbooks on autoimmune cookbooks. Where are you best contacted?
Yeah, so my website is the best way to just find all my information there. That's www.truefoodandwellness.com, all spelled out. And then my cookbook's on Amazon. So there's rheumatoid arthritis cookbook, and then the second one's the rheumatoid arthritis healing plan. So that one just has even a couple exercises in it, a little more holistic approach with that second book.
Fantastic. Thanks again for joining me, Caitlin. It's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you, Kate. I had a great time. Bye-bye.
Can you relate to Caitlin's story? I believe it's really important for each of us to recognise and be in tune with our own body ailments and those of our children so that we can address any health issues before they become chronic or life-threatening. There are many tools that we can actually use ourselves, such as changing our diets, removal of chemicals within our environments. Now, these practices often fill the gaps of the many autoimmune conditions that conventional medicine cannot always solve. Although not always clinically proven, everyone is different, and there are many anecdotal successes using different methods to regain health and well-being. I'm Kate Mason. Thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and a review that would help others learn about the podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my newly launched book, Who Is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies, and we'll see you next time.